Chief Justice John Roberts has been known to go his own way, even though he was considered a conservative when nominated by the second George Bush in 2005. This is most likely because he is far more of a neocon than a conservative. He worked with both Reagan and the first Bush in various positions. He has voted with the liberals on matters that have pissed off the conservatives far too often to truly be a conservative in the truest sense anymore. Now he is warning the incoming Trump administration of ignoring federal court rulings because of some of the comments. This is interesting considering the amount of times the Biden administration has tried to go around the rulings and the Democrats talking about impeaching members of the court at all levels. Liberals are cheering it because of the timing, but it could be the simple fact that Roberts knows that conservatives will complain but will not attack the federal judiciary like the liberals have. Two things. One, down in the Substack below is all the research, and there is a video of a speech from John Thune in here. It is almost 8 minutes, but it is worth listening to on this topic. Howdy, y'all. This is Paul, the Redneck Thinker. What we have here is a channel to communicate. I want you folks to be thinking about the time you leave my videos. Why? Because I'm tired of people talking via what other people tell them to think. So, watch my video and enjoy the chance to think for yourself. Here via CNN is what Roberts said and liberal response. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts slammed what he described as dangerous talk by some officials about ignoring federal court rulings using an annual report weeks before President-elect Donald Trump takes office to stress the importance of independent judiciary. Officials from across the political spectrum have raised the specter of open disregard for federal court rulings, Robert wrote in the report released by the Supreme Court on Tuesday. This dangerous suggestion, however sporadic, must be soundly rejected. The Chief Justice didn't detail which officials he had in mind, and both Republicans and Democrats have hinted at ignoring court rulings in recent years. Still, Roberts' year-end message landed days before the January 20th inauguration of a president who has repeatedly decried the federal judiciary as rigged. Trump's agenda, particularly on immigration, could put the incoming president on a collision course next year with the Supreme Court he has helped to build by naming 3 conservative justices during his first term. Every administration suffers defeat in the court system, sometimes in cases with major ramifications, Roberts wrote. And yet, he added, for the past several decades, both parties have respected court decisions and have headed off the kind of constitutional confrontations that arose during the Civil Rights era when some southern states declined court orders to integrate. Roberts, in particular, pointed to decisions by the Eisenhower and Kennedy administrations to enforce school desegregation rulings. In 1957, for example, President Dwight D. Eisenhower sent the 101st Airborne Division to Little Rock to integrate its schools after officials sought to defy Supreme Court decisions that found segregated schools unconstitutional. By the way, Democrat-ran state at the time. Roberts lamented that public officials, whom he also did not name, had regrettably attempted to intimidate judges by suggesting political bias in the judges' adverse rulings without credible basis for such allegations. Those attempts, he warned, are inappropriate and should be vigorously opposed. As in past years, the Chief Justice avoided direct mention of the controversies and challenges brewing within the Supreme Court, including lingering questions about ethics, a weeks-long scandal this year over controversial flags hoisted at Samuel Alito's properties, and sagging public confidence in the nation's highest court. By the way, it's been found out that it's not the nation's highest court that's got the sagging public confidence. It's mainstream media has been lying about it, which was proven via CBS report. In a series of interviews before the election, Vice President-elect J.D. Vance raised doubts about his fidelity to Supreme Court decisions. In a 2021 podcast, as the New York Times previously reported, Vance urged Trump to respond to adverse court rulings like Andrew Jackson did and say the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. This whole thing's starting to sound interesting. Here's the John Thune speech. It's exactly how the Democrats have been attacking the Supreme Court. It's a little long, but I doubt most of you know it, so sit back, enjoy it, because it'll fill you with a little bit of knowledge real quick.
Mr. President, the Supreme Court recently concluded its term, and as predicted, Democrats met the decisions they didn't like with howls of outrage. We will fight to rein in the outrageous abuses of this brazen court, one Democrat offered temperately. We must expand the court now, another cried, before it, quote, destroys our democracy and our planet, end quote. Yet another announced that she would be filing impeachment articles against a Supreme Court justice or justices, presumably for the high crime of ruling in a way that she didn't like. Mr. President, for years now, since at least the last administration, Democrats have been engaged in a concerted campaign to paint the Supreme Court as illegitimate and extreme. We've heard about stolen seats and MAGA justices and other melodramatic statements meant to persuade the American people that the Supreme Court has somehow been hijacked. But what it all boils down to, Mr. President, is this. Democrats think that the only legitimate Supreme Court is the Supreme Court that rules in line with Democrats' policy preferences. That's it, Mr. President. That's what all of this boils down to. Democrats can dress things up any way they like with a host of invented reasons for why this court is illegitimate. But the truth of the matter is, Democrats' real problem with this court is that a number of the justices have had the temerity to periodically deliver rulings with which Democrats disagree. If this court were universally delivering the outcomes that Democrats want, they would have no problem with the court or its Republican nominees. Mr. President, I could spend time debunking Democrats' wild claims. I could point out just how often this court delivers unanimous decisions. Yes, contrary to what you might think from Democrats' lurid statements, the Democrat nominees and the Republican nominees are frequently in unanimous agreement. Or I could talk about just how often some of the court's more conservative justices and some of the court's more liberal justices agree. But I'm not going to do that today, because I'd like to spend a minute talking about the profound irresponsibility Democrats are displaying. We hear a lot from Democrats about their concern for our institutions. And yet they are attempting to delegitimize a bedrock American institution, all for the crime of periodically daring to deliver decisions with which Democrats disagree. And at a time of deep political division, I can think of few things more irresponsible than attempting to shake Americans' faith in the impartiality of the court and the legitimacy of our institutions. Mr. President, I realize the Democrats don't like it when a decision doesn't go their way, and I completely understand that. I've disagreed with a few Supreme Court decisions in my time. But it's one thing, a legitimate thing, to disagree with the decision. It's another thing entirely to let your disagreement lead you into attempting to delegitimize a duly constituted court composed of 9 duly confirmed justices. And I hate to tell Democrats, but in a Democrat republic such as ours, you don't always get your way. And the proper response when you don't get your way is not to attempt to tear down institutions or pack the court so that you always get the outcome that you want. Mr. President, before I close, there is one other thing I would like to address, and that is the disturbing anti-religious sentiment that has cropped up in recent Democrat attacks on the court. It's not a new thing for Democrats, of course. We all remember the Democrat ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee telling then Circuit Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett that, I quote, "the dogma lives loudly within you," end quote, with the implication that anyone who takes his or her religious faith seriously can't be trusted to hold public office. Another judicial nominee faced scrutiny for his membership in the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic organization that participates in such disturbing activities as serving veterans, raising money for the needy, and providing young people with scholarships. And of course, during the last presidential election cycle, a Biden staffer stated that she'd prefer that Orthodox Catholics, Muslims, and Jews not sit on the Supreme Court. Now, it would appear that that anti-religious sentiment is back, with more than one Senate Democrat suggesting that certain members of the Supreme Court can't be trusted because they happen to take their religious faith seriously. These Democrats take the fact that these members of the court have periodically ruled in ways that Democrats don't like as evidence that they are attempting to impose their faith instead of the law, with the implication that religious people are incapable of distinguishing between the two. Mr. President, the Constitution is very clear on whether being a person of faith can disqualify you from public office. From Article 6, and I quote, "No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States," end quote. Well, let me just repeat that. No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. It's becoming clear that that isn't a section of our Constitution that Democrats agree with, or at least understand. And that in and of itself is deeply disturbing. I shouldn't have to tell Democrats that religious people are as capable as any other of distinguishing between their beliefs and the law, or that our founders did not intend for religious people to be second-class citizens, or that a Supreme Court justice disagreeing with a Democrat does not mean that the Supreme Court justice is attempting to impose his or her faith. It likely means that he or she is trying to impose the law and the Constitution. And I'm a little tired of members of the Democrat Party promoting the un-American idea that taking your faith seriously makes you less qualified to participate in the public square. Mr. President, if Democrats really cared about protecting our democracy and American institutions, they would stop trying to undermine the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. But with Democrats' inability to deal with not getting their way, and with an upcoming election this November, I'm not going to be holding my breath. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Oh, and if you don't mind, like, subscribe, comment. And I've got a link tree down below that's got my social media. And it has my Patreon if you want to help out. Thank y'all. Now, I don't agree with a lot of the way that Roberts votes anymore. And I don't agree with the way the court goes a lot of times. But it should be taken into example by studying the history of the Supreme Court that eventually the Supreme Court unscrews itself. Yes, there have been times that there have been rulings that have been horrendous. But there have also been laws created that have been horrendous, and nobody's talking about getting rid of Congress. Okay, we need to get rid of members of Congress. That's been the talk. And there have been a few folks that have taken it a little further than they should have. But the Supreme Court is, and will always be a necessary part of this government. We need that judiciary. We need it independent. And people need to start studying some history. They really do, because the Supreme Court is exceedingly valuable. May not like John Roberts, but okay. I haven't liked a lot of members of the Supreme Court, such as Taney. But there comes a point where you got to realize that it balances itself out. We can't have another FDR. We can't have another Adams. We need to leave the Supreme Court alone and let it be the way that it is. This has been Paul, the Redneck Thinker. Y'all have a good day now. Bye. folks, I just want to say thank you for listening. I want to thank you for taking your time. I want to hear what your comments are about what you think on this topic, because your comments are what's important, not necessarily mine. I don't care if you're Republican. I don't care if you're conservative. I don't care if you're liberal. I don't care if you're Democrat. I want to hear your opinion on these topics. I want to thank you yet again for listening to my video. Like, subscribe, and all that other hoopla. This has been Paul, the Redneck Thinker. Y'all have a good day now. Bye.